book, Our Story. Today we're in conversation with Uday Maukar. He is the Central Information Commissioner with the Government of India. He is also a former Deputy Editor with India Today, written 2 books on Prime Minister Modi. But today, while I'm talking to him, he's written a book on Veer Savarkar. In fact, I have the book in front of me. It's entitled Veer Savarkar, the Man Who Could Have Prevented Partition. He's co-authored the book with Chirayu Pandit, who's also an authority on Savarkar, in fact. But Uday, welcome to this conversation, and congratulations on your third book, and also a very high-profile launch. You had Mohan Bhagwat there, you had the Defense Minister, you really got all the headlines. But before we go on to the issues in the book, I want to ask you, why did you choose Savarkar? Suddenly we are seeing there are a lot of books on Savarkar. We have Vikram Sampath, we have you. Is there a concerted effort to bring new people into the narrative of partition? The BJP government has kept saying that a lot of people have been neglected. So are you and a whole lot of people not?
No. My commitment to the subject is very old. It has nothing to do with the current efforts of anybody regarding Savarkar. I always felt that he was an unsung hero, and much misrepresented, much demonized. And in fact, I have said in one of my articles that when it comes to demonization of a patriot, then I think the demonization of Savarkar is one of the biggest controversies across the world, anywhere. So I always believed that Savarkar has not got his due. And therefore, I attempted this book.
I'm going to focus on some of the subjects that are not talked about. We've been discussing his mercy petition in various interviews. I've seen you discuss it, even Vikram Sampath's book after Rajnath's comments. So let's leave that for later. But his role in his assassination also, I'll dwell on that later. I want to talk to you about his national security vision. You said that, he is actually, he's a man who could have prevented partition, A. B, the fact that if the Modi government is implementing his national security vision, and if earlier governments had, then we would have had a very strong India. Explain these comments.
There are two parts actually to your question. One is his efforts to prevent partition of this country. Now, a lot of people ask me, that he has been painted as a very divisive figure. How could he portray him as a unifier? But he was always a unifier. Number one. From 1937 onwards, he was warning Congress and the country about the fact that if Muslim appeasement continues unabatedly, then India will have to pay a very heavy price. This he started doing from the very first day, which is, he was for 10 years, 14 years, he was in rigorous imprisonment, which is very well known. And then for 13 years, he was an internment in Ratnagiri, where the order about Savarkar was that he will not do any political activity and he will not leave the limits of Ratnagiri district. And there he led one of the biggest social reforms in the country by the untouchable movement he led in Ratnagiri. Is supposed to be something which is totally unknown,
He was against the caste system. He fought against untouchability.
He stepped into politics in 1937 when he was out of internment in Ratnagiri. And he had a choice. Subhash Chandra Bose, Achyutrao Patwardhan, S.M. Joshi. These three leaders invited Savarkar to join the Congress. But Savarkar said, the kind of Muslim appeasement which Congress is indulging in, and it has gone so ahead on the path of Muslim appeasement that it will be totally against his principles to join the Congress, because Muslim appeasement in a Hindu majority country is betrayal of the nation.
And but he is also quoted as saying Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations. So then, how can he be against partition?
It is again falsification of facts. This is his 1937 speech when he took over as president of Hindu Mahasabha in Ahmedabad, and there he said that there are two nations within one nation, one Hindu and one Muslim, and then he sees that as a disease. He says this we cannot ignore it. This needs to be treated. And then he says that let us be on guard. He tells Hindus, let us be on guard.
As a disease is a very strong word, Uday.
Strong disease, yeah. He did not use the word disease. The language
You're going one step ahead of Savarkar.
meant that the Muslim appeasement politics of Congress and the communalism of Muslim League has led to a very, very serious situation. And this needs to be treated. You cannot ignore it. And then he says that let us be on guard, let us be hopeful, but let us be on guard.
On guard against what?
On guard against the communalism of Muslims and the Muslim appeasement policies of the Congress. Two things. So he had been warning from 1937 onwards. In 1940, when Congress passed, when the Muslim League passed the Pakistan resolution on 23rd March 1940, he again warned that the way Congress is going ahead, if it doesn't retrace its steps, then partition is possible. It can happen because of the weak need policy of the Congress. He warned that. That time, Congress leaders said that partition will happen on our dead bodies. 7 years later, Savarkar was proved correct. So, and he kept on warning till 1945, 46, 45.
You're saying he's different from Jinnah in that sense because both Jinnah and he saw Hindus and Muslims as two nations, but Savarkar saw nation as a group of people. So he made a difference between state in terms of state is a political unit. You're two nations, but you are within one state. But Jinnah actually saw them as two different states and he wanted partition.
No.
Am I right?
Jinnah, no. I think we are confusing it, Jinnah wanted to become a leader. Jinnah took the path of, separatism because he wanted to become the leader of all Muslims. That was his ambition. But then one very important observation we have made in this book was that Jinnah was never as big a liberal as he has been painted. Every person you find saying that Jinnah was a great liberal and later on he became a fundamentalist. It is not so. 1916 Lucknow Pact, which is the starting point of Muslim appeasement by Congress, was drafted by Jinnah at the behest of Lokmanya Tilak. That time was close to Tilak. And same argument which is being given today, that if you want to keep Muslims in the mainstream, you must give them something. The same argument Jinnah was making in the Lucknow Pact. He opposed Khilafat. But that one evidence is not enough to give a certificate to Jinnah that he was a great liberal from day one. He had also had some political ambitions from day one, because he was the person who convinced Lokmanya Tilak to go for the Lucknow Pact, which is the first step in the direction of Muslim appeasement by the Congress. Then comes Khilafat, which was many steps forward, in Muslim appeasement. So that is one part. So he kept on warning the Congress and the nation and the Hindus also. And and you have to understand his Hindutva, which we have explained in this book. In this Hindu manifesto, it clearly says that all castes and all religions will have equal treatment in Bharatvarsh or Hindu Rashtra. Then he goes a step further. He says that should anybody try to hinder the prayers of religious minorities, the state will step in and protect them. But he warns, at the third place, he warns that the nation will not allow creation of a nation within a nation in the name of religious minoritism. And that is the story of India in the last 70 years. Not many people know that India, it was Muslim communalism and the Muslim appeasement of Congress which led to India's partition. But within 10 years of India's partition, Pandit Nehru forged an alliance of Congress with the Muslim League in Kerala. The very party which had caused India's partition, Congress had an alliance with them within 10 years of partition. Get my point? Now we come to the second part, which is national security.
National security.
You see, whatever problems India has faced on the national security front in the last 70 years, I think Savarkar had warned about all of them 60 to 80 years ago. Pakistan, he told Kripalani, actually Kripalani, he made this statement at least twice, He said, those who are threatening civil war and trying to get Pakistan at the point of sword, at the point of civil war, just imagine if they get weapons tomorrow. And the other tools, as an independent nation, what they will do. And that is what is happening today. What is happening in Kashmir, what is happening, it's all, Savarkar's prophecy is coming true. Then China. China, 1954, Pandit Nehru came up with this principle called Panchshil, where he said that if these 5 principles are followed by India and neighboring countries, they would be able to live in peace and brotherhood. That time, Savarkar warned Pandit Nehru that after the way China has followed Tibet, if you talk in such weak terms with China, China's thirst for swallowing land will increase. And I won't be surprised if China attacks India and swallows Indian land. And his prediction came true 8 years later in 1962 war, when we were badly mauled by China in that war.
One question, come to the present. It's coming true now also in Galwan. We're doing the same mistake that Nehru made, right? And not listening to Savarkar.
No. Galwan is a different story. Galwan has happened because...
Sorry, we also were giving away our own advantages.
The Modi government was strengthening the military infrastructure on the border. That is what brought Galwan. But it did not do it earlier, because there were roads being made on the border, helipads being made, airports were being made. Entire 300 plus kilometer border was being strengthened militarily by India. That is the reason.
So, but then what happened after that? Chinese came into our territory. We did a pact which again gave away our heights. I
think that is a debatable issue. I think we must restrict today to Savarkar and my book. That will be a better thing to do. 54 again, Savarkar told Nehru that your Panchshil consists of beads of the rosary. Beads. When you do mantrochar, you use that rosary, Your Panchshil consists beads of the roses, but our China's Panchshil consists bombs, tanks, machine guns. And then he appealed to the Indian youth not to get misled by this policy and should prepare India. He told the nation and the youth particularly that you should be prepared to make bombs. So Savarkar was recommending India as a nuclear state as soon as it was born, which we did 20 years later. We did do it. How many years later? 30 years later. We did do it. Then on Assam in 1941,
we are in conversation with Uday Mavurkar, who just authored a book on Veer Savarkar, and we were just talking to him about his Savarkar's vision for national security and why Uday thinks that this government is actually following Savarkar's principles or not. Let's ask him. Uday.
So we were talking about Assam. In 1941, East Bengal Muslims were settling in Assam Valley in very large numbers. They were migrating to Assam, which is Brahmaputra Valley. And that time it was Savarkar who warned that these Muslims who are coming from East Bengal, they will pose a threat to not only to Assam's culture, but also to the security of the India's northeastern frontiers. That time Jawaharlal Nehru said, nature abhors vacuum, which means that where there is vacant space, people will come and stay. How can we stop them? Savarkar's way was very harsh. He gave a retort to Nehru saying that Jawaharlal Nehru's knowledge about environment is very poor. Nature also abhors poisonous gas. It was a very harsh way of putting it. But today it is true. The reason is that Muslims...
East Bengal Muslims to poisonous gas. That's quite a very harsh statement, right?
It was a harsh statement, no doubt. But it is true because that time the Muslim population in Assam was only 10 to 12%. Today it is 35%. And a large number of these Muslims have become Wahhabis, which nobody is aware. A large number of these Muslims in Assam, they have become Wahhabis. When they came, they were not Wahhabis. They were Dargah worshipping Muslims, Sufis. So, I mean, his way of putting it was very harsh, but it is correct. 35% what? I mean, 35% Muslims were, the nation allowed them to settle. It did not do anything about it, Yeah.
To sum it up, Uday, he was not saying that I want Hindus and Muslims to live in two separate states, but the Muslims who are living in India should embrace in the idea of India as a Hindu India, as embrace it as the fatherland, embrace it according to our principles, right?
No. Again, yeah, correct. But he's not changing. Ask them to change the religion. What is being portrayed is, what is being depicted is that in Hindu Rashtra, Muslims would become second-class citizens, which is wrong. Because the last page of his book, Hindutva, is very important. There he says, a day will come, that time the population of Hindu was 30 crores, 1923. He says, a day will come when the world will have to accept the power of this 30 crore Hindus, At that time he defines, how will the Hindus deal with the rest of the world? He says, the way Hindus will deal will not be different from what has been written in Gita or what has been said by Lord Buddha. So he is in the end talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So what we say is that Savarkar's Hindutva was a Hindu protective view. Because Savarkar himself said that if minorities have a right to protect themselves, then majority also has a right to protect itself from an aggressive minority. So Savarkar's, at the end of the day, Savarkar's Hindutva is a Hindu protective view, not a Hindu supremacist view. And if I take what he has written in Hindutva, the last page forward, it would mean his today's superpowers. You must be aware that how they are exploiting the smaller nations in, say, African continent. They have been exploited for their resources by the so-called superpowers. What Savarkar meant was that we will treat them equally. If I interpret his what he has written on the last page.
So basically, Muslims should not ask for special treatment just because they are in a minority. That's why he's saying one man, one vote, no appeasement policies.
Yes,
that's the sum total.
That should have been the story of India. If Muslims, Indian Muslims, if they had got a country called Pakistan on their demand, for Hindus it was a division of motherland, partition of motherland. Correct? So then why should pro-Muslim policies continued after independence? Why if thousands of temples were broken during the medieval period, Hindus are demanding only three places. One was Ram temple, and second was Mathura, and third was your Kashi Vishwanath. What is the problem? A settlement has now been made by the court in Ayodhya. Those mosques in Mathura and what you call in Kashi Vishwanath, why Muslims can't say that we can remove it to some other place? Why can't there be repentance? And why Hindus, after giving Pakistan, accept this? Hindus are not saying that convert all the temples which were broken and converted into mosques. We want them. They're not asking for all the places. They were asking only three places. They're asking only three places, So Muslim appeasement has continued in India.
Muslim
two more things I want to add regarding Savarkar's national security vision. The 1965 war. In the 1965 war, Indian Army, the Jat regiment was only 13 kilometers away from Lahore. Only 13 kilometers away, and we accepted ceasefire. Correct? And in Tashkent next year, in the Tashkent Treaty, we gave back almost everything which we had won. So that is a very good example of lack of Savarkarian vision. Then in the 71 war, Mrs. Gandhi did a very good job of dividing Pakistan. but she could not settle the POK issue, you know. We were holding 93,000 soldiers. Had Mrs. Gandhi insisted, Bhutto would have been forced to settle the Kashmir issue. But we did not. And secondly, on top of that,
Kargil also. I mean, we've always been losing on the negotiating table. Uday. It's not just. I said India has always lost on the negotiating table for some reason. You know, whatever we win militarily, we give away on the negotiating table.
Yeah.
Which I even, I know you don't want to talk about China and India right now, but it's happening in the near future also, in the present also. But quickly, I want to just bring in this politics of this mercy petition. You know, enough has been talked about it. But the fact that, you know, Rajnath ji was in fact asked, and he said Gandhiji asked Savarkar to write the mercy petition, but that was in 1920s. Savarkar has been writing mercy petitions since 1911. And we've seen Rajmohan Gandhi's statement also that, you know, it was on the plea of the Savarkar brothers that he responded. He never said that he should ask for mercy, never said I should embrace the British as my parental land, open your parental doors. The language he used was also very, submissive. So what do you think?
I look at it very differently. You can't weigh Savarkar's actions with the tools of Gandhi. Savarkar's inspiration was Shivaji. Now let us understand Shivaji. Shivaji, I am doing another book very soon, and where I will describe how Shivaji has revived Chanakya Niti in the medieval period.
That's interesting.
Now you see, when Shivaji passed away, he left the world. Not many people are aware that the length of his kingdom, unbroken, was 1600 kilometers. The starting point was the Valsad district today in South Gujarat, and it used to end beyond Jinji in Tamil Nadu. This length is, the width was less, the length was 1600 kilometers. Now this is the length. This is more than the distance between Kabul and Delhi today. The distance between Kabul and Delhi is only 1300 kilometers. The distance between Ghur, from where Muhammad Ghori came and enslaved India, the distance of Ghur to Delhi is only 1525 kilometers. So, Chhatrapati Shivaji did a tremendous job, you know. Same Shivaji had tendered in his lifespan at least 4 to 5 apologies to Aurangzeb. Each apology had a scheme, had a purpose. When he used to feel, you know, he had set a target for himself. Target was Hindvi Swarajya, self-rule, you know. Correct? Hindvi Swarajya.
Apology was part of a strategy of Savarkar.
There is no doubt about it. And Savarkar tried to flee. Savarkar, when he was brought from London, he had tried to flee. Everybody knows he dived into the sea and he was caught at the Marseilles port, unfortunately. And secondly, you have to see all the corroborative evidence. Reginald Craddock was home member at that time. And he writes to the jail authorities that those who have passed more than 5 years in rigorous imprisonment in the cellular jail, they may be allowed to settle outside the jail and live with their families. Correct? But don't allow Savarkar. Because Savarkar is most dangerous. I don't trust him. I don't trust his mercy petitions. And he has got friends in Europe. This is all recorded. He has got friends in Europe, revolutionary friends in Europe. They will come with a ship and they will hijack him from here. So we have to see this whole thing in a very different light. I think, you know, the time to talk about petitions is, I think, over. Enough of it. We should talk about partition. How partition happened and which were the main causes which led to partition.
And Savarkar's role in that. We're totally out of time, but I suggest you read Uday's book once again. I'm holding it up, and you'll get some of the answers to the questions and a debate that is very topical and current in our time today also. So thank you all for watching this show, and thank you, Uday, for taking the time out to speak to NewsX. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.